The End of Oak Street is one of, if not the best dinosaur films since the original Jurassic Park. And I think one of the biggest reasons why that is it feels like one of the first dinosaur movies since 1993 that isn't trying to replicate the plot, themes, or the morals of that film. Jurassic Park was obviously about the horrors of dinosaurs, but it was also structured as a fable about capitalism, scientific ambition, and people profiting off of human lives for the sake of the theme park. And every sequel has, in some way, try to grapple with the ideas that were introduced in that movie. The End of Oak Street isn't really interested in doing that. Instead, it's focused much more on simply the fear of nature. These are creatures that are millions of years removed from our current place in time and suddenly appearing in the middle of an ordinary neighborhood. The movie follows this family that is mysteriously transported back into the age of dinosaurs. They have no idea what happened. They are trying to figure out and just survive. And they're desperately looking for a way home, all while their neighbors are getting brutally murdered by dinosaurs. And I think one of the reasons why this film works so well is the scale feels rather small despite using these massive creatures. The original Jurassic Park benefited from being a relatively contained story. It only had to worry about a handful of characters on an island while merely hinting at what something like this could mean for the rest of the world. But every Jurassic Park sequel, especially Jurassic World, has had to answer the questions of how the entire world would respond to dinosaurs being around again. That forces those movies to constantly introduce new scientific discoveries and increasingly complicated ideas of how this world actually works. The End of Oak Street barely touches that. There are certainly scientific elements in this film, but they're more just an explanation to get us from one plot point to the next, but the movie isn't particularly interested in providing a thorough analysis of how this world operates. And honestly, I think that's a good thing. It keeps the movie focused on the people who are actually experiencing this nightmare. But what's really interesting to me, and I think what might throw some people off, is the movie's tone. This is a period place that initially takes place in 1982, and you are very aware of that from the beginning, from the set dressing to the costumes to the music that is being played in the background, and even the way the characters interact with their family and neighbors all feel extremely 80s, and sometimes it's so over the top that it can come across as corny. This is a very cliche nuclear family, from a mother, father, daughter, son, and each one is seemingly filling the exact way you would expect that role to be filled. I personally found it fascinating because it doesn't necessarily feel like a realistic depiction of 1982. What it feels like is more of a depiction of how movies and entertainment from that era presented what they consider to be the ideal family. It actually reminded me a lot of Don't Worry Darling, where the community feels less like a lived reality and more like a fantasy version of a particular period in American history. And that's where I wonder how self-aware this movie is, because there are moments where it does feel like it is just winking at the audience. Ewan McGregor is particularly interesting in this regard, because there's something about his performance that comes across rather sarcastic or even cheeky, whereas Anne Hathaway is as sincere as she will ever be. I think the two of them present these interesting dynamics where it feels like they are not always on the same page of what the tone of this film is, but I think that adds to the frustration that these characters have with one another. It makes me wonder if we are supposed to be aware of how cliche and silly this presentation of the nuclear family actually is. I'm not convinced this movie is trying to make some deeper, profound statement beyond the importance of family, but there is something interesting about taking this extremely traditional, almost idealized family structure and throwing it into an environment where everything is actively trying to tear the family apart. And in an era where sincerity isn't always appreciated in film, it does feel rather nice at times to see a movie that just wears its emotions on its sleeve. That being said, the best part of this film is in fact the dinosaurs. The action set pieces are fantastic, and there are some really thrilling and creative ways that the movie uses these creatures. There are definitely moments where you'll want to roll your eyes. Characters make dumb decisions because the movie needs them to make those decisions in order to get to the next scene, but the movie moves so quickly that those moments don't really have time to linger. It's a relatively quick movie, just barely over 90 minutes, and wastes no time getting you to the next exciting sequence. sequence. So even if you are recognizing that the logic doesn't always add up, you're usually having just too much fun to care. And ultimately, I think that's why I enjoy The End of Oak Street so much. It isn't necessarily the strongest script. I don't think it's trying to present the most complicated or profound ideas, but it's original, it's thrilling, and it has some genuinely creative action sequences, and it gives you enough interesting ideas to walk away with afterward. And I think that's the most important part, is that this movie isn't trying to be like other dinosaur movies. It is really carving its own lane. And after decades of having no other dinosaur movies succeed, I'm just really glad that we have this one. So those are some of my brief thoughts on The End of Oak Street, but I would love to hear what you have to say. So if you've seen the film, let me know, comment below, and I will see you next time.